Yeah, very good. Because we recognize the human genome is not just a few million years old. Where did our genome ultimately come from? It only came from that first primordial organism way, way back in the past. And even if, say, the accumulation of mutations wasn't that rapid back then, although it had to be pretty rapid if you're going to have all the evolutionary advancements they talk about. But even just in the span of what they would say of human existence, we should be extinct. We cannot, at the current rate of mutation accumulation, we cannot be more than, dare I say it, a few thousand years old. Yes?
In your opinion, how old, what's the oldest age those rodents could be to have that live tissue in there?
Okay, as a biblical creationist, we're going to position that dinosaur fossils are a result of the Noahic flood. So you're going to put that at probably between 4,000 and 6,000 years ago. I'm a little more comfortable with 6,000 years ago because I'm trying to squeeze a little bit of the Hebrew history in where I don't have Moses living in 1200 BC. I want Moses back further than that. So I want to push, so I'm a little more comfortable going closer to the 6,000 years, but between 4,000 and 6,000 years ago would be the flood. So the fossils would be between 4,000 and 6,000 years old. Even then you're going to struggle a little bit to say why should we still have the tissue even after that. But we would recognize that because of how the flood buried, the pressure would he used, the processes would he used, very rapid burial. Even evolutionists in their attempts to explain the preservation of the tissue would say that it had to be very rapid burial. Any geologist here? How's the best way to rapidly bury so you get not only a rapid burial, but you get fast fossilization? A lot of water. Not only water, a lot of water. Let me think, is there something biblically that would give us a lot of water? See how that works? See, it's not anti-intellectual, it's not anti-science, it fits hand in glove. There's no rope. Don't step over it. There's no rope. Yeah.
So I've on that same subject, so I've seen a few articles trying to explain one way or another how something that should be gone in less than a few thousand years could hang around for 70 million years.
It actually goes a lot longer than that now because they're finding it in a lot of older fossils. Yes.
Hundreds of millions of years.
Yes.
Right? So it starts to just be ridiculous. But you know, they talk about something to do with iron and these different things.
Yes.
Is there anything out there that has any credibility like that?
I'm not going to say the iron model lacks all credibility. We would say the iron model works very well for us. If you want to best preserve this stuff for 4,000 or 5,000 or 6,000 years, rapid burial, a lot of water, rapid fossilization with a little bit of iron. Now, if you want to expand that now from 6,000 years to 60 million years, I think you got a huge problem. The iron model, the whole thing behind, just to give you real quick, the whole thing behind the iron model is that they're saying a little bit of iron in the tissue would catalyze reactions that would cause the proteins to knot up. And as they're knotted up, then they become more resistant to enzymes and microbes and just simple chemical degradation. There's some truth in that. But that's not saying the same thing. It's back to origin of life. Yeah, if I run this particular reaction, I can get an amino acid. If I run this particular reaction, I get a different amino acid. If I run this particular reaction, I get 3 amino acids. But you know what they don't tell you is also get things like formic acid that come in and destroy it as well. What you see with the iron model, for example, is not only are you just getting a single amino acid that you can't then say gives you life, you're getting a little bit of preservation, but the very reactions that are causing that protein to knot up are also catalytic reactions that are going to cause it to break apart. So, as I argue, it becomes a race. Which happens first, preservation or degradation? So that's why the best you can get with the iron model is a few thousand years. Works for us. Doesn't work for them. But you see, when you got nothing else, what are you going to do? You throw it up. Got something. Mary Schweitzer, who I mentioned before, she's been one of the leaders of this. And I mean, I'll give Mary kudos. She has done some very, very good research. And just been moving forward on this and taking a lot of criticism and still moving forward and doing the way science is supposed to be done, except the problem is she's a very avid evolutionist. So she's not willing to look at the other side. Therefore, there's got to be some explanation. So she's a big proponent of the iron model. Some friends of mine went to see her give a presentation this week. And they said what was most remarkable about the presentation is what she didn't talk about, and that was any preservation models. She just totally ignored explaining. She explained what they had found, that it was there, but she didn't offer an explanation of why it was there from an evolutionary long perspective. And I thought that was kind of fascinating. Does that mean she just doesn't want to talk about it because she knows it's weak? I don't know. So yeah, they had that as one of their explanations. And it has some chemical basis, but what they're doing is they're extrapolating it way, it's the one amino acid, it's water on Mars, some kind of life. Yeah, you have to have water to have life, but water doesn't mean life. You have to have amino acid and proteins, but one amino acid doesn't mean you have proteins. So a little bit of preservation with iron doesn't mean it's something that lasts. And they've got to go way beyond 70. There's a beard worm, Cambrian, 500 million. I think of that. That's 500 million years. Found fragments of proteins in it. 500 million years. I am going to challenge that evolutionists tend to view ages the way that Congress views dollars. I'm old enough, I remember Everett Dirksen. Remember his famous statement? Billion here, billion there, pretty soon you got real money. I'm convinced that the evolution is the same way. Oh, a million years here, a million years there, pretty soon you got significant amounts of time. To them, a million years is almost like nothing, and yet the reality of it is a million years is an extraordinary long period of time. You think of everything that's happened just geologically during your lifetime. During your lifetime, the Mississippi River has changed channels I don't know how many times. You can go to Missouri, and several feet down in the middle of the field is a river ferry boat that blew up right after the Civil War, killed about 2,000 Union soldiers. It's in the middle of the field, 2 miles away from the river. But see, that's where the river was 150 years ago. See, so just geologically in those short periods of time, look at what happens. Look what happened in Mount St. Helena. Just overnight, boom, like that. So you think, okay, let's extrapolate that out to a million years. Goodness gracious. And yet they're wanting to act like that, oh, in a million years, I don't know, you might get a little bit of sediment or something. They want to act like nothing happens. And it comes also the same thing with soft tissue. Somehow, these proteins that will degrade almost, when you're a biochemist in the laboratory, you've got to handle proteins very carefully. And you remember I listed off a number of proteins. Collagen was the top protein. Okay, collagen is by far one of the most resistant of the biological proteins. But a number of those other proteins are not nearly so resistant. So they're arguing about how, well, maybe collagen is so tough it can survive all these millions of years. Actin can't. Myosin can't. Histones can't. So they're focused on collagen, and I keep challenging. If you read some of my stuff online where I'm going back and forth with evolutionists, I can say, you keep forgetting about all these other proteins. Even if you think somehow you've got some bizarre scenario that's going to account for collagen, what about those others? Forgot about them because they don't even last a fraction as long as collagen does. And I don't get a response from that, it's just silence. Yeah.
If you've had examples of soft tissue in dinosaur bones, how many is the world aware of since 2005, we'll say, that we have this many examples of soft tissues in dinosaur bones? And do the secular scientists turn around and say, hey, you've handled these, there's been contaminations, as your example, hey, this bone was sitting on the shelf. Is there anything to refute that, saying, hey, you secular scientists?
Yes to all of those. As far as the world knowing how many examples, no. For the most part, only the specialist will be able to identify all the different examples that, and Bob Inyard, if you've heard of him, a friend to have up in there in Denver, he's really working with me and some other creationists to keep a running list of everything. The truth of the matter is that depending on how inclusive you want to be, if you want to include anything that is considered a biomolecule, that'd be a lipid, a protein, a carbohydrate. Now, carbohydrates are typically much tougher than proteins. So it's easier for them to account for a carbohydrate lasting this long than they can a protein. Proteins are a big problem for them because they're not nearly as tough. But if you're counting all the biomolecules, then what you have is there's been a lot of biomolecules found in a lot of different fossils over a lot of different so-called geologic ages, going all the way back to the Cambrian, pre-Cambrian even. All the way through the entire geologic record are fossils being found that still contain biological molecules. Now, as far as what I was showing you, the big stretchy stuff, there's just a few. But part of that is because most labs aren't looking for it. You ought to be specifically looking for it. And that's obviously until recently paleontologists would have even scoffed at the idea. So they weren't looking for it. So as we look for it, there will be more and more found. As far as criticisms, most biochemists still don't believe it. To them, it's contamination. Why? Because they know better. It can't have lasted. I'm a biochemist. I know biochemistry. I know how proteins work. I've worked with proteins my whole life. There ain't no way on God's green earth. Of course, they probably use something worse than God's green earth. You know, there ain't no way on God's green earth that you're going to get a protein, even a fragment protein, survive 100, 200, 300 million years in a fossil in the ground. Ain't going to happen, period. So it can't be. So it's got to be contamination. And that's evidence notwithstanding. It doesn't make any difference. In fact, back when she was first doing some early publishing, Mary got a response from one of the reviewers of one of her manuscripts, and they said, no, this can't be, I don't believe it. And she said, well, what evidence would you believe? And they said, no evidence. Because it just simply can't be. The rope is there. I don't care what you say, the rope is there, and I'm going to keep stepping over it. See, because they understand you cannot have this tissue. And this is the challenge I have made. If evolutionists think that fragments of proteins are hard to explain in a multi-million year fossil, you haven't even come close to explaining big, stretchy pieces of meat in a multi-million year fossil. So, you know, you may be able to argue that that little bit of protein is a contamination. You're going to argue that big piecey stretch like what you just saw, that's contamination? That's not contamination. That's not how contamination works. Well, that's contamination with a bird got in there and cheaped off some of its stuff and put it in the fossil, you know, that's not irrational. When you start breaking them with fossils, start pulling out these big, and this is not some kind of microbial stuff. I've seen microbial biofilm. It doesn't look like that. It doesn't have the characteristics. And microbial biofilm doesn't carry bone cells in it. So the microbial biofilm idea was put down years ago. Now this is animal meat being pulled out of dinosaur fossils.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is there any intact DNA in this session?
I have not looked for DNA because to look for DNA would take a very elaborate clean room, and I don't have that. There have been some researchers in the past that have claimed to have identified fragments of DNA from dinosaur fossils. You run into a problem because as much potential to have for protein contamination, you have much greater potential of DNA contamination. And so they come under very heavy criticism that it can't be, it must be contamination. But, again, not well I am pushing on it. I outline all this in this book. in some work that Mary did a few years ago, chromosomes are in the nucleus of the cell. In other words, they're localized in that cell. So it's not like they're scattered all over. In bacteria, you see the chromosomes all over. But in your animal cell, in my classes, I would answer that for you. Yeah, I'm sorry, she's with the other guy right now. That works. Boy, they make sure it's off from then on. In an animal cell, the chromosomes are localized in the nucleus. She did a stain called DAPI, and DAPI is a very DNA-specific stain and lit up the nucleus of the cell. Now, we still cannot undeniably say it's not contamination until you get enough to sequence to show that it's not, for example, human DNA that somehow got contaminated. But the fact that it lit up the nucleus and nothing else, that really makes it hard to justify that it's contamination. So is there DNA there? There may be. If there's DNA there, then evolutions are going to have to scramble even more to explain it. So what you find is, on the one hand, they want to find DNA because, man, that's Jurassic World. Man, that's Jurassic Park. That's exciting scientifically. But evolutionarily, that is really troublesome. And the iron model that we were briefly talking about is one of their explanations. If the iron model really preserved the proteins, it would destroy the DNA. At least destroy to the point of being able to react with the DAPI. See, because the iron model causes the protein to all cross-link. See, to do the protein sequencing, they have to unwind it. So they got to break it up from all this tight. For the DAPI to bind, it has to be in its natural state. If the iron's reacting with it, it's not in the natural state anymore. See, so if the DNA is still there and reacting with DAPI, you can't have all these iron catalyzed reactions going on because it wouldn't leave it alone. So it's a conundrum for them. So, well, I hope they find DNA. We'll see. But I don't know how serious they're going to look because it would be scary for the evolutionists.
Okay, cut it off there then.